A CBS News Battleground Tracker poll finds most women say President Trump will be a factor in how they vote in this year's midterms. CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe sat down with Director of Elections and Surveys Anthony Salvanto, as well as Amy Walter, the national editor of the Cook Political Report, for this week's edition of the Battleground Briefing.
Women are running for office in record numbers and fed up with President Trump, but will they actually vote in higher numbers this fall? Welcome to another edition of the Battleground Briefing. I'm CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe, joined by Anthony Salvanto, CBS News Director of Elections and Surveys. And this time, we're thrilled to be joined by Amy Walter, national editor of the Cook Political Report and a co-host of WNYC's The Takeaway, heard on public radio stations nationwide. We should also mention that Anthony is the author of the forthcoming book, Where Did You Get This Number? A Pollster's Guide to Making Sense of the World. It's out on Tuesday. I've already pre-ordered my Kindle copy. Sadly, you can't sign my Kindle, so we'll have to figure out another way to make that happen. You could, but then I wouldn't be able to read it.
Yes.
Well, thank you both. I'm really excited about this one because these are two people who can get you down to like the street level of congressional districts across the country that we're monitoring and that we're worrying about this year. And of course, this iteration of the Battleground Tracker is focused primarily on women and their attitudes on the elections coming up. So give us sort of the top line analysis and findings of what you have for us this weekend.
Well, the first one is a striking gender gap, or maybe not so striking given the way we've seen things going over the last couple of years. In particular for women with college degrees who are by double digits saying that they would prefer to vote for a Democratic candidate over a Republican. And the reasons that they give for that are really the president. That they're voting against the president, that they're feeling like he does not respect people like them. You know, the thing that I want to emphasize is we did this poll in the districts we think are the most likely to flip or most competitive, and those districts profile as having more women with college degrees. They are more affluent districts than districts nationwide. So it's almost by definition that that's the key group, and that's a lot of what you're seeing, and that's a lot of why you see the simulation, the model, edging towards the Dems.
We've seen in this survey and others a stark gender divide on the preference. Do we have any sense, both of you, that the divide is harder this time or similar to years past?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I looked back at where we've been in midterm elections with the gender gap, and depending on how you calculate it, people have different ways of defining the gender gap. But the way I looked at it, it suggested that the gender gap has never really hit the double digits. Or another way that I've seen it is it's hit the double digits, but not as high as this one. So there are all indications that we're going to have a gender gap in this midterm election that's bigger than anything we've ever seen. Now, it may be by just a point or two, but I think it's the continuation of a trend. And what fascinates me about where we are politically at this time is not necessarily that the country has gotten more divided since Trump has been elected. I think we are as divided as we were on 2016. It's just harder and deeper than it was in 2016. And so the question, of course, is whether this polarization lasts beyond Donald Trump, right? Is this about him, or is this about bigger trends that have been headed in this direction, but he helped to be the catalyst for those?
And that really sets up one of the key questions we watch as we go through the fall. I mean, it's August, so this is all in play. One of the things is this going to be a base election? So to your point, is it that there are hard, fast partisans who either decide to turn out or not to turn out, and that's what decides who wins? Or is there still any play where people could maybe make a different decision or change their minds? So far, it looks more like that turnout-based election. We'll see what happens. It looks like some of the Republican women who voted for Trump and I mean this by single digits, might be a little bit more reluctant to say that they're voting for a Republican, but that doesn't mean they're defecting to the Democrats. Right. And there's this enthusiasm gap. Right. And we sort of conflate that with turnout. It's not perfectly correlated with turnout, but the enthusiasm gap where women, Democratic women, say that they're more likely to show up and that they haven't before in a midterm. Yeah. So that's one of the things. Does that sustain?
Well, and I think it's not that Republicans turn out and vote for a Democrat, it's that they don't turn out at all.
At all.
Right? And I think that's the bigger threat right now for Republicans, is that, not that Democrats are suddenly going to win all these converts. I think the threat for Republicans is threefold. One, you're right, that new people show up and vote in midterms. We saw that in that panel of focus group, the woman who said, I'd never voted before. Mm-hmm. I'm now motivated to go do that. Whether Republicans stay home. And then the third, when you look at who these voters are, we talk about college-educated districts versus not. You know, every electorate, even though you can have a pool of people that are called college-educated voters, but they're going to look different than the people that showed up in a previous election.
Right.
Some college-educated people showed up last time, some people didn't. And I think what we may see is that, because we've seen this in past midterm elections, traditionally, the voters who do show up are more educated, they're older, they have higher income. And if Trump changes the math, it will be that he helps to turn out a bigger proportion of non-college voters.
Right.
But I think if that doesn't happen, even districts that don't have a lot of college-educated voters, they turn out at a higher rate. And thus, that gap that we saw in a suburban swing district can show up in districts that maybe we don't put into that same category. They're more exurban or more rural, but